On the night of 2nd January 1981, a routine police patrol in Sheffield stopped a car with false number plates. The driver was Peter Sutcliffe, a 34-year-old lorry driver from Bradford. The prostitute in his car was named Olivia Rivers. Nothing seemed extraordinary, but this was the Yorkshire Ripper. For 5 years, he had killed across northern England, leaving 13 dead women and countless survivors bearing physical and psychological scars. Police had interviewed him 9 times, generated millions of documents, and failed to connect the dots. 9 times. Peter William Sutcliffe was born in Shipley, West Yorkshire, on 3rd June 1946, into a working-class Catholic family. His father was an alcoholic who beat his children. Sutcliffe left school at 15 and worked as a gravedigger throughout the 1960s, a job he reportedly enjoyed too much, volunteering for overtime washing corpses. In 1974, he married Sonia Suma. Their marriage was strange and cold. Sonia would later be diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. His murder spree began on 30th October 1975. That night, he followed 28-year-old Wilma McCann as she left her council house in Chapeltown, Leeds. McCann was a mother of 4. Sutcliffe approached from behind and struck the back of her skull twice with a hammer. The police investigation involved 150 officers and 11,000 interviews. It identified no suspects. On 20th January 1976, Sutcliffe killed Emily Jackson, aged 42, who had been persuaded by her husband to prostitute herself from their family roofing van. He stabbed her 56 times with a sharpened screwdriver. On 5th February 1977, he murdered 28-year-old Irene Richardson in Roundhay Park, Leeds. He bludgeoned her with a hammer and stabbed her in the neck and throat. Once dead, he mutilated her corpse and neatly placed her knee-length boots over the back of her thighs. On 23rd April 1977, he killed 32-year-old Patricia Atkinson in her Bradford flat. On 25th June 1977, he murdered 16-year-old Jayne MacDonald, who was simply walking home alone. She was not a prostitute. Her murder shocked the public. A broken bottle was found embedded in her chest. On 1st October 1977, Sutcliffe killed Jean Jordan, aged 20, in Manchester. Days later, he returned to retrieve a new £5 note he had given her. Police traced it to banks in Bingley and Shipley, narrowing their field to 8,000 employees. Over 3 months, they interviewed 5,000 men, including Peter Sutcliffe. They checked his alibi and found it credible. The trail went cold, but the killing did not. On 21st January 1978, Sutcliffe killed 21-year-old Yvonne Pearson in Bradford. 10 days later, he killed Elena Ritka, aged 18, in Huddersfield. Ritka was the only victim he raped. He stabbed her repeatedly through the heart and lungs. On 16th May 1978, he murdered Vera Millwood, a 40-year-old mother of 7 from Manchester. He slashed her stomach open and stabbed her repeatedly after death. 7 women dead. Police had interviewed thousands, generated millions of documents, and they were nowhere. On the 4th of April 1979, Sutcliffe killed 19-year-old Josephine Whittaker as she walked home in Halifax. He stabbed her with a screwdriver 21 times in the chest and stomach, and 6 times in her right leg. Her skull was fractured from ear to ear. On 1st September 1979, he murdered 20-year-old Barbara Leach, a university student who had left a pub. He stabbed her with the same screwdriver. The murder of another woman who was not a prostitute alarmed the public and prompted an expensive publicity campaign. Despite matching forensic clues and being on the list related to the £5 note, he was not strongly suspected. Sutcliffe was still out there, working his day job as an HGV driver, living an unremarkable life while the body count climbed. In 1978, investigators received letters and a cassette tape from someone claiming to be the Yorkshire Ripper. The letters were signed Jack the Ripper and taunted the investigation. The tape contained a man's voice with a distinctive Wearside accent from the northeast of England. Police dubbed the sender Wearside Jack and shifted their entire focus onto him. For the next 2 years, they chased this phantom, interviewing thousands of men with Wearside accents, while Peter Sutcliffe, with his broad Yorkshire accent, remained invisible to them despite having been interviewed on multiple occasions. The hoaxer was later identified as John Samuel Humble, a man who had nothing to do with the murders. But by then, the damage was done. The police inquiry had wasted years chasing a false lead, and while their resources were diverted, Sutcliffe kept killing. On 20th August 1980, he murdered Marguerite Walls, a 47-year-old civil servant from Pudsey who was walking home from work. He struck her with a hammer, dragged her into a garden, suffocated her with a rope around her neck, and left her partially covered in grass and leaves. On 17th November 1980, Sutcliffe killed his final victim, 20-year-old Jacqueline Hill, a University of Leeds student. She was returning to her hall of residence when he attacked her on waste ground behind a shopping centre in Headingley. He struck her with a hammer and stabbed her repeatedly in the chest and once in the eye with a screwdriver. Jacqueline Hill was Sutcliffe's 13th and final murder victim. Less than 7 weeks later, his luck ran out. On the 2nd January 1981, police in Sheffield stopped Sutcliffe in a driveway. He was with a prostitute in his car. A routine check revealed his car had false number plates. He was arrested and transferred to Dewsbury Police Station in West Yorkshire. The following day, a sergeant named Robert Ring followed a hunch and returned to the scene of Sutcliffe's arrest. Behind an oil storage tank, he found a knife, a ball-peen hammer, and a rope that Sutcliffe had discarded when he briefly slipped away to use the toilet. In the police station bathroom, officers found a second knife hidden in the toilet cistern. When confronted with the weapons, Sutcliffe confessed. Over the following day, he calmly described his attacks. He stated that he experienced an overwhelming urge to kill any woman, but he only expressed regret when discussing his youngest victim, 16-year-old Jayne MacDonald. The trial began that May 1981 at the Old Bailey. Sutcliffe pleaded not guilty to 13 charges of murder, but guilty to manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. 4 psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. He claimed voices from God had ordered him to kill prostitutes, originating from the headstone of a Polish man he had encountered while working as a gravedigger. A prison officer later testified that he had overheard Sutcliffe tell his wife that if he could convince people he was mad, he might get 10 years in a loony bin. The jury took 5 hours to reject the defence. Sutcliffe was found guilty of murder on all 13 counts and 7 charges of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 20 concurrent life sentences. The judge recommended a minimum of 30 years, but on 16th July 2010, the High Court imposed a whole life order. Sutcliffe would never be released. He spent most of his sentence at Broadmoor Hospital after being transferred there in March 1984 following his schizophrenia diagnosis. In August 2016, he was deemed mentally fit and moved to HMP Frankland in County Durham. During his imprisonment, West Yorkshire Police faced severe criticism. The Byford Report of 1982, fully published in 2006, confirmed that the major incident room had become ineffective, that information was stored on handwritten index cards, making cross-referencing nearly impossible, and that investigators had become fixated on the hoax tape rather than forensic evidence. Sutcliffe had been interviewed 9 times over 5 years. Each time he slipped through. His friend Trevor Birdsall had even written an anonymous letter to police in November 1980, giving Sutcliffe's name and address and his reasons for suspicion. The letter was lost in the backlog. On 13th of November 2020, Peter Sutcliffe died in hospital at the age of 74, having contracted COVID-19 in prison. His death brought no relief. 13 women were dead, Their lives ended in waste ground and darkened streets across Leeds, Bradford, Manchester and Halifax. Their names remain Wilma McCann, Emily Jackson, Irene Richardson, Patricia Atkinson, Jayne MacDonald, Jean Jordan, Yvonne Pearson, Eleanor Ritka, Vera Millwood, Josephine Whitaker, Barbara Leach, Marguerite Walls, Jacqueline Hill. 13 names, 13 lives, and behind them, the 7 survivors who lived to tell what he had done. The Yorkshire Ripper case remains one of the most catastrophic police failures in British history. It exposed how an entire investigation could be derailed by a hoax tape, how prejudice against sex workers allowed a killer to operate unchecked, and how outdated systems could let a murderer walk free for 5 years despite being known to police. Peter Sutcliffe gave nothing in explanation that could ever justify what he did. The answers died with him.